Hey everybody, and thanks for watching 3dmotive.com. My name is Cordell Felix, and on this video I will show you how to set up an exploded scene using a high poly mesh and its unwrapped low poly to bake a normal map and ambient occlusion. I've seen ways of baking normals and ambient occlusion that seem to take too long. There are techniques like using keyframes with animation, and there are also scripts to explode models, which takes a lot of work to get them to work right, plus they tend to crash often because we are dealing with high poly meshes. I found a way that is very quick and gives you great results. I will be using 3ds Max 2013 for this technique, and this video assumes that you have a basic knowledge of modeling and baking textures with the render to texture in 3ds Max. This video also assumes that you have the final version of both the high poly mesh and the low poly mesh. We want each of the meshes to be in their final state in another 3ds Max file safely away from this bake scene here. This scene is used purely for baking, and all the render to texture information will be applied to the final low poly model in a separate 3ds Max scene. You need to have both the high poly mesh and the low poly mesh in the same scene. If I do unhide all, you can see that I have the low poly here. And right now it's about 500 units out, and if I collapse it, it'll have the same pivot point. This is very crucial. You need to have both the models need to be in the same pivot. For now, I'm going to isolate the high poly from the low poly. So I'm going to put the low poly back onto 000, and then I'm going to right click, hide selection. So now the high poly is completely by itself in this scene. The first thing you need to do is to link all the floaters to the corresponding mesh. All you have to do is select the floaters that belong to an element and use the select and link chain at the top left, right here, to parent the two together. You can select multiple floaters at once and use the link tool. I've left some floaters on the back that I want to parent to the body of the weapon. So if I hit F4 to go to wireframe mode, these are the floaters that I want to parent. These guys are here. So in order to parent them, I need to click this select and link, click the floater, and then drag it to the element that you want it to follow. Now when you move the parent, the floaters will move along with it. So the reason we want to do this is because when you have the low poly caging around the high poly, you want it to pick up that extra floating geometry. You can select multiple floaters at once and then link them to the parent. So I have a couple more that I need to attach. So there's this one, and these. And then there is these guys. And this guy too. So with those selected, I click the selected link and then drag it to the parent. So if I hit W, go to translate and then click that. Now when I move this, everything will follow, including all those other floaters that I selected. So that's great. The rest of the model already have their floaters parented, so you can see that when I move say like this bolt, the floater follows, or this guy here, everything should follow. And I wanted to note that you should be deleting anything that is going to be using the same UV space. So I have these pillars up here, or these cylinders, and these things that are exactly the same as to right there. So if I delete these, that's just less things I need to grab. With the high poly still isolated, I want to be able to select everything at once without needing to click all the elements. I can do this by using the selection name set to name everything that's selected. Here's the selection name set. This way I can still select everything even though it is all detached while the low poly is in the same scene. To give the high poly a selection set, I need to select everything here or hit Ctrl A to make sure that everything is selected. And then I'm going to just put in HP for high poly at the top. That way it creates a selection set, and now instead of clicking everything individually like that, I can just go up here, select high poly, and there it is. Now I'm going to hop over to my low poly. I'm just going to do right click, unhide all, and then select the low poly that's underneath my high poly, and then isolate it by hitting Alt Q. Now it's isolated. Since my low poly mesh is all attached, I'm going to use a script to detach all of the elements. I'm going to detach everything because I will be selecting both the high poly and the low poly mesh and drag them away to explode everything away from each other. You could detach each element by pressing 5 to go to element mode, and then selecting an element and then hitting detach over here. You can do that for each element, but I find that to be a little slow. I'm going to Control Z these to get them back into place. And there is a great script on ScriptSpot called detach elements, which I have saved right here. So this will be linked in the YouTube video. And I'm just going to go ahead and drag the script into 3ds Max. So I have the script here on my desktop. So I'm going to drag this into 3ds Max now by going over the icon and then dragging it in. So with this open, I can select my low poly, and then I do not want to keep my source objects. What that will do, it'll basically create an entire low poly again that is attached, and I don't want that. I just want everything to be detached. So I'm going to click detach, and it'll do its thing. And now it'll unhide everything, but if you just hit Alt Q, it will isolate that out again. So I'm going to get rid of the script now, and you can see that when I click each element, it is all separated. So that's exactly what I want. I'll be doing this because I'm going to be selecting both the high poly and the low poly mesh like this, and then drag them away from each other, and then explode everything. I'm going to move this back now. So now I want to give the entire low poly a selection set. So I'm going to select everything by hitting Control A, and then go to the selection set and give it the name low poly. So now instead of selecting everything at once, I can just go here to low poly, and there we go. Oh, and I just noticed that I didn't delete these guys up here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. If I unhide everything now, and have the low poly and the high poly right on top of each other, I can select either the high poly and drag that out there, or I can select the low poly. Now I do this because now I can go in here and select both the low poly and high poly elements and just drag them away from each other like that. If I take that whole body, drag it away, you see that the low poly and the high poly are both going out in the same direction. And plus the floaters are following the high poly. Now I want to do this for the rest of the weapon. So if I zoom out, and then now I want to pick this magazine here, and move it to the left. I want to try and keep everything from left to right, so it's easier to just move down and fix the cage. So let's kind of drag this body up here a little bit more, kind of isolate these things on their own. And I'll start with the big shapes first. You want to keep everything kind of away from each other because you don't want to be picking up any extra information from different parts of geometry. We are almost done. We just have these small bits here. And you want to select everything by kind of drag clicking like that, because if you just click one, you don't know which one you're going to select. So try and drag click both the high poly and the low poly. And all the floaters will be following their parents. So that's really nice. And that's pretty much how you explode everything. The next step is to select the low poly using the selection set. So go to the selection set and then select the low poly. I need to isolate this now. The reason I isolate it is because I need to attach everything. We do this because when using render to texture, we need the entire model to be attached together so we can get the full UVs. It may look a little weird with it being attached and exploded, but we are using this mesh solely for baking purposes. The information we bake from the high poly will go onto the final low poly's 3ds Max scene that we have safe in another folder. So now to attach everything, I'm going to select this body here, right click, and then click this attach square. And then now with everything here, select everything. Click and drag all the way down, and then click attach. Now everything there will be attached. Oh, and I just noticed this point helper right here. This thing creates itself whenever you use the detach elements. Sometimes I forget about it, but you need to delete it because it gives you problems when you try to bake textures. So if you just delete it now, it won't give you any problems in the future. So I'm going to hit delete and go back to my scene. Now I'm going to unhide everything and have the low poly and high poly sitting on top of each other. And now I'm going to do some render settings. I'm not going to get too far in depth, but I will just do my basic settings. So I'm going to hit 0 for render to texture. Then you can hit F10 or go to this render setup here. And under renderer, I'm going to enable SSC, do filter Catmull Rum, enable global super sampler, and then do Hammersley, and I'm going to do quality 1. That is the maximum you can do. I'm going to take this off now and then go to render to texture. So for render to texture, I need to have my low poly selected, and that is not my low poly. There it is. So now it's with it selected, I need to enable the projection mapping. So I need to pick the high poly, and these are all the high polys here. So I'm going to go in here, hit Control A to select everything, and then click add. So now it's going to do some calculations. So now it's done calculating, and it kind of made a big mess of everything, but don't worry, because now just go to projection and go to cage, and then go to cage here on this tab. Then I'm going to go to shaded and then reset everything. This will reset the cage exactly to where the low poly is sitting. Now I'm going to do some cage editing. I'm going to select all the vertices by hitting Control A and make sure that you're in vertice mode. And I'm going to move the amount here for push up a little bit. Now when you let go, it's going to set everything to 0, and you cannot bring it back to like a lower 0 to set it back to the low poly. If you want to do that, you have to click reset. So now for this video I need to wrap things up a bit. So I'm just going to do a quick cage. So with every vertex selected, I'm going to use the amount and bring it up just a little bit, and you'll see that everything there is going up. I'm going to close this render to texture window for now. And for right now, this body is the most important to me. I wanted to note that if you have everything selected for like elements, and say if I try to select just a single element and scale just that one up, it's still going to scale the rest up, as you can see there. So if you want to scale up just one part, you need to select the vertices only. And what I like to do is select the element and then hold Control and then click the vertices, and then it'll select the element's vertices. And there we go. So I wanted to just custom this one, so click reset and then bring it up. There we go. The navigation for when you're doing these cages is a little funky, because when you try to zoom in on an element like this and hit Z, it's just going to zoom in on the whole scene. So if I was trying to zoom in here and zoom in close and hit Z, it's going to zoom out, because that way it's getting everything in the scene. So you need to manually zoom in with a scroll bar, or you can hold Control Alt and middle mouse click drag, and that'll bring you in and out very smoothly. Let's get back to the render to texture menu here, and I'm just going to zoom out. So now that I'm ready to do a test bake, I'm going to add a normals map. So go to this, there's our one already added, so let's add a new one, new normals map. And it's at 256. 256 is a good size because it's a nice quick bake, and if there's any errors, it'll show as red. So if any red spots that I know, I will just enlarge the cage and it'll compensate for that. Now I'm going to set a destination folder, and let's go here, do a targa. You should have one here already, yeah. So I'm going to overwrite this one. And make sure it's at 24 and it looks just like this. These are my settings. And let's do render. So there is some red on the map here, and what I would do is go back to the model and readjust the cage in those areas. So for this, I know that it's the muzzle. So I would find the muzzle, wherever it is right here, and then I would adjust the cage accordingly. So I would reset it, and I would bring the amount back up, and then I would re-render. So I'm going to render it out at 2048. So I need to bump this up to 2048, and then I'm going to render it, and I'm going to preview the final normal on the final low poly mesh in the separate 3ds Max scene. Here are the results of the 2K map that I just rendered out. It's not perfect, but it looks pretty nice. All the floaters baked nicely, this magazine here baked nice, this coil here baked really nice. The only thing that has problems is the muzzle here. And if I just tweak the cage just right, then this wouldn't be a problem. So even with just a simple cage adjustment as I did for mine without doing each element, I still got pretty good results. And that's it for this quick tip. My name is Cordell Felix, and thanks again for watching 3dmotive.com.